Welcome back. So, in our last session, we dug into the world of the manufacturing workshop, which, as you'll recall, was all about that complex division of labor among skilled artisans. Well, today, we're going to see that entire world get completely shattered. We are jumping right into the very core of the capitalist system, the revolutionary age of machinery and modern industry. And let's be clear, this isn't just about a few new gadgets. It's a fundamental transformation of how we produce, how society is structured, and what it even means to be a worker. So, here's how we're going to tackle this. We'll work through it in 6 sections. We'll start by really nailing down what a machine is. Then we'll look at the economic logic behind it. And from there, the profound social consequences. Everything from life on the factory floor to the creation of a surplus workforce. And we'll wrap up by unpacking the central contradiction that machinery creates for capitalism.
All right, first things first, what actually is a machine? For Marx, this is not some trivial technical question. The whole shift from the manufacturing era to modern industry really hinges on understanding this revolutionary change in our instruments of labor. And it goes way, way beyond just making a more complicated tool.
And right here, this is the fundamental inversion that's at the heart of Marx's entire analysis. Think about it. In the old workshop, the worker was the subject, the one skillfully guiding the tool. But in the factory, that relationship gets flipped completely on its head. The machine itself becomes the subject, this self-moving, self-regulating mechanism. And the worker is reduced to an object, a mere living part attached to it. Marx breaks down a fully developed machine system into these 3 distinct, absolutely essential parts. First, you've got the motor. Think of the steam engine, generating this massive, controllable power that's totally independent of human or animal strength. Second, you have the transmitting mechanism, this whole complex web of gears, belts, and shafts that distributes that power. And third, you have the working machine itself, the part that actually does the job once done by the artisan's hand, like spinning or weaving. When you combine these 3 parts, they're no longer just a bunch of separate tools. They become something else entirely. So when all these parts come together, the result isn't just a building filled with machines. The entire factory becomes the machine. It becomes a single integrated automaton, what Marx calls this mechanical monster. And in that system, the worker isn't just using a machine anymore. They are incorporated into its enormous system, forced to keep up with its relentless, furious pace. But why do this? Why does capital embrace this monstrous system with such passion? Is it just about being efficient? Well, for Marx, the answer is way more specific than that. The real driving force is capital's unending search for surplus value, and machinery turns out to be a uniquely powerful way of extracting it. So how does machinery actually generate profit? It's not primarily by making people work longer hours. Remember, that's what we called absolute surplus value. No, this is about creating relative surplus value. And the logic here is absolutely crucial. Step 1, machines make it incredibly cheap to produce goods. Step 2, this includes the very things workers need to live, like food and clothes. Step 3, when a worker's subsistence gets cheaper, the value of their labor power, that is, the cost to keep them alive and working, actually falls. And what does that mean? It means they earn back their wages in fewer hours of the workday, leaving more hours for the capitalist as pure surplus value. Now, for any individual capitalist, the immediate goal is to hunt down this extra surplus value. If you're the first one to innovate, you can produce your goods way cheaper than your competitors, so you can sell below the average market price to grab market share, but still sell above your own individual cost, and for a little while you pocket a nice bonus profit. But that advantage is always temporary. What Marx calls the coercive law of competition forces every other capitalist to adopt the same new technology, and then poof, that extra profit disappears, and the whole cycle just starts all over again. So this constant drive for relative surplus value isn't just some abstract economic formula. No, it has really profound and often incredibly brutal consequences for the living, breathing workers whose labor is being sucked into the process. This famous and, let's be honest, chilling quote really captures the dynamic perfectly. For Marx, capital is dead labor. It's past labor that's been embodied in things like machines, and it acts like a vampire. It can only come to life by consuming living labor. The machine then becomes the ultimate weapon for this consumption, the fangs that suck the lifeblood right out of the worker. And this sucking of labor takes three immediate forms. First, because the tasks are now simpler, capital can hire women and children, pulling a new, cheaper labor force into the factory. Second, the enormous cost of all this machinery creates a huge pressure to run it 24/7, which leads to the prolongation of the working day. And finally, the speed of the machine now dictates the pace of the worker, intensifying their effort every single minute of every single hour. The human toll of this system was just catastrophic. This number, 26,125, that was the infant mortality rate per 100,000 children under 1 year old. In Manchester, the very heart of the Industrial Revolution. And this isn't speculation. It's from an 1861 medical inquiry that Marx himself cites. Official government reports from the time, like the one we see summarized here, drew a direct, undeniable line. You can see it clearly. Wherever the industrial employment of mothers was high, whether it was in the factory towns or the newly industrialized agricultural gangs, infant mortality just soared to horrific levels. The cause was obvious. Mothers were absent, children were neglected, and there was widespread use of opiates just to keep starving, uncared-for children quiet. Okay, so the machine doesn't just change the labor process. It actually creates an entirely new social environment for production. It creates the factory. This slide really gets to the core of the difference. The old workshop was, in essence, a social organism. It was organized around the division of specialized skills between people. But the factory is a technical organism. It's a vast automaton. And its organizing principle is the complete subordination of the human being to the constant, objective motion of the machinery. The whole logic shifts away from human skill and towards mechanical necessity. What this means is that the factory becomes much more than just a place to work. It's a comprehensive system of power. Marx describes its barrack-like discipline, where the factory owner imposes their own private rulebook, a penal code, and the foremen act like industrial sergeants. The endgame? The workers' time, their autonomy, every movement is completely subjected to the authority of capital, an authority that's embodied in the rhythm of the machine. So, this totalizing system of production brings us to one of the most critical and, frankly, most enduring concepts in Marx's entire analysis of capitalism. And that's the constant creation of a relative surplus population, what he famously calls the Industrial Reserve Army. This leads us to the essential question, one that's still debated today. Does machinery, by making us more productive, ultimately create jobs or destroy them? Now, the common theory at the time, the compensation theory, basically argued that displaced workers would always find new jobs somewhere else. But Marx saw a much more contradictory and much darker dynamic at play. The key for Marx is understanding the changing composition of capital. Let's look at this example. Machinery means a much bigger chunk of a capitalist's money is tied up in the means of production, the constant part, and a smaller chunk is used to pay for labor power, the variable part. So even if the total amount of money invested in an industry grows massively, and that leads to more jobs in absolute numbers, the number of workers employed relative to the total capital is always falling. Machinery is constantly making a portion of the working class redundant, or as Marx puts it, setting them free. And this freed population is what forms what Marx calls the Industrial Reserve Army. And this is so crucial. He argues this is not just some unfortunate side effect of progress. He says it is a necessary functional component of the entire capitalist mode of production. It's as vital to the system as the machinery itself. So why on earth would this reserve army be necessary for capital? Well, first, it provides a flexible, ready-to-go supply of labor for when the economy booms and industry needs to expand suddenly. Second, the competition for the few available jobs forces workers who are employed to accept overwork and terrible conditions. And most importantly, this constant surplus of available labor acts like a weight, a lever, constantly pushing wages down to whatever level best suits capital's need to accumulate. And so we arrive at the fundamental contradiction of machinery, as Marx sees it, within the capitalist system. And here, Marx makes his argument incredibly explicit. The function of machinery isn't just economic, it is deeply, deeply political. It is capital's single most powerful weapon in the ongoing struggle with labor. It deskills artisans, it breaks the power of organized workers, and, he claims, it's frequently introduced for the sole purpose of crushing strikes and enforcing discipline.
And this brings us to the final and most critical question that this whole chapter forces us to confront. If machinery, under capitalism, doesn't actually lighten our work, if it doesn't shorten the workday or free us, but instead it intensifies our labor, extends our hours, and subjugates us to the machine, then what is its purpose? For Marx, this reveals the central contradiction of the entire system. We have created technology with the immense potential to liberate all of humanity from toil, but it's trapped within a social system that can only channel that incredible power toward one single relentless goal, the endless accumulation of capital.